Some questions cannot be avoided. The question of love, the question of death, the question of what it is to exist. They keep not only theologians and philosophers busy, but they touch every human being in some way or another. Philip, how do we go about exploring these questions?
Philosophy has taken some interest in this subject, obviously. One of the problems with thinking about these philosophically is philosophy wants to understand reality as it is, and it wants to fix on ideas that are going to be always true. What's always true about love, or always true about death, and always true about existence. The trouble is, what's always true about human life is that we die, that we're finite, that we live in time, and that we're changing. And if we fix our thinking on eternal ideas, how do we match that thinking up to a life characterized by birth, by things coming into being, and by death, by things going out of being? So I think love and death are absolutely central to the philosophical task, because to really think reality as it is, to think it truly, is to affirm the truth, and in a certain sense to love the truth. But it's also to come to terms with reality as being finite. It's the fact that we're going to die. Now, in Christian thought, these notions of love and death are intimately linked. So from the fourth gospel, greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Well, that's taken up again in the first Johannine epistle. We know love by this, that he lay down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. Now, this is all very well and good, but it's a bit hard to get your head around, because if love involves self-sacrifice, so that Jesus loves his followers by laying down his life, they love Jesus and love other people by laying down their lives, they in turn lay down their lives, where does it all end? We have a whole series of self-sacrifices, but where do you get to the affirmation of existence, to a finite life that is really good and really true and really real? And that's the problem which I want to explore. And I think the existential philosophy that thinks about mortality might have just a little bit of something to say to us on this.
It's been argued that one of the characteristics of Christian thought is that it's fascinated by death and then life after death. Is there a sense in which that fascination with death is a dead end, if you pardon the pun, in that perhaps we should be concentrating on what is it to love and live before death?
Yes, it is, in part. There's a good philosophical reason for thinking that concentrating on death is a dead end. But the reason actually comes from Martin Heidegger, who is the most famous philosopher for giving us an analysis of what it is to live before death.
Being towards death.
Yes, being towards death. And what Heidegger says is that we can have no experience of death because we don't experience our own death. When death comes, we are not. So in our being in this life here and now, we don't experience our own death. We don't experience the death of others because we might watch them die, but we don't know what it is to die because we don't know what they're going through, because they're going through a separation from us in dying, so we can't see what it is happening to them. So in that respect, there is no concept of death, or as he puts it, death is the possibility of the impossibility of existing. So I think there's no contradiction between that and the opposite approach to philosophy, which is say, don't think of death at all. Spinoza says a free person thinks as little as possible of death. And but this is true because anyone who's really thought of death has actually really been thinking about life. And it's true for Heidegger, and it's true for all the existentialists, because there is no concept of death. And that raises, a profound question about, can we understand love if love involves self-sacrifice? Because if love involves a death, and we don't have any kind of conception of death, what is really going on here? So I think I want to explore this problem by going back to the existential issue of what is it to face up to death. And perhaps the first person to set this out was the Christian philosopher, 19th century philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, under a pseudonym. It's just a kind of a playful exploration. Supposing death were so treacherous as to come tomorrow, his pseudonym asks. The first question you need to ask is, am I beginning upon something now, what I'm doing in these remaining moments, that is worth beginning? Is it worth planting a tree today, for example, if I'm going to die tomorrow? And to really think about this provokes a kind of anxiety, because of course we're all going to die at some point. And so we all ought to be asking all the time, am I doing something worthwhile now? Am I starting something that is worthwhile, or am I wasting my life on trivial matters? So the thought that I might die tomorrow actually awakens this sort of inner sense of anxiety. Have I wasted my life? Because I haven't been spending it thinking about death all the time. Another question which we might ask then is, has my life been worthwhile? Have I lived it according to my deepest values? And that provokes a sense of guilt. It doesn't matter what your deepest values are. It's very likely that you've not lived every single moment deeply in accordance with them. So death also produces guilt as well as anxiety. But whatever we think, it also produces one more kind of, one more crisis, which is we have this inescapable desire to live. Even when we feel depressed and desperate and we want to end it all, it's in some sense what we're crying out for is a true life, a better life, rather than the one that we've had. So we have this desire to live and this desire for possibility. But knowing you're going to die tomorrow completely contradicts that. And it's a predicament of complete impotence. To know that we are finite is to know that we're relatively powerless. We can't achieve our deepest desire, but nor can we get away from our innate desire, our will to live. It's there within us. It's fundamentally there. So thinking through death provokes this kind of inner conflict. It's one of the hardest things to face up to, because if you start facing up to it, you start being divided against yourself. I think this has tremendous possibilities, this inner division. Normally, the aim of we take the aim of thinking deeply at things is to achieve a certain sense of peace, of inner unity, of coming to the truth, of coming to the right ideas. And that inner peace is seen as a desirable state. But if we think about our finitude, we're more and more thrown into a state of inner conflict. So what are the results of that? There are different existential modes relating to death, different orientations you can take. The most obvious one is, I don't like thinking about that. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to distract myself. And you can disperse your attention in the world, where it doesn't matter if it's external goods that you're seeking, wealth, status, power, recognition, pleasure. Or it doesn't really matter if you try and find the internal equivalents of those, which might be self-sufficiency or independence instead of wealth, self-respect instead of status, self-control instead of power. Well, that's one kind of response. Let's put aside death and at least try and become something untouchable within or untouchable without. But that's a sort of fooling yourself. The next response would be the opposite of that. It's a kind of return to yourself. It's coming back to yourself. Oh, I've wasted my time. What is it that I really, truly care about? And it's that return to yourself that's one of the transformative aspects of thinking about death. It keeps asking you that question, what is it that I really care about? How should I really spend my last few hours, my last day? But the more you think about the question, then the more you get caught up in the inner conflict, the anxiety, the guilt, the sense of impotence. But there's actually a final stage, there's a fourth stage. And perhaps when people sit and reflect on what it is to face death, they don't notice that this fourth stage is there. But when people do actually have to face death, it can suddenly come to them. And this is when you're really faced with death, when you're heading down the mountainside at high speed, and you see the rocks on the ground beneath you, and you think you have moments left. Not only do you feel a sense of impotence, but you feel a sense of absolute irresponsibility. Life is no longer your problem. All right, it's one thing to care about things, but you can do nothing. And it's a kind of existential realization that you could compare to religious notions such as justification by faith, that I'm reprieved or relieved of all my responsibility for what I got wrong. And then if this moment were to last again, how would you live after that? Well, you go back to diversion again, wouldn't you? So I think these four stages are cyclical. There's diversion, there's coming to yourself, there's the sense of inner conflict, and then there's reprieve from the inner conflict, and then there's back to diversion again. So it's a matter of passing through a kind of cycle. But if you do actually pass through this cycle, it has a certain kind of effect on you, because you're always coming back to the question, what do I really care about? And then you're always turning back to the world and turning back to life again with a sense of the one hand of freedom and liberation, but also on the other hand of deep caring and deep responsibility. Now this is beginning to sound like what it is to love. And in fact, I think if we ask what is it to really love another person or to really care about a situation, what is it to really expose yourself to it? In part it's a matter of yourself becomes unimportant. You lose that self-concern. The thought of death makes you obsessed with yourself. The thought of love makes you lose that self-concern completely. It's a concern for the other person or for what's out there or for a situation. But what is it that prevents us from truly loving other people? Well, it might be something within ourselves, but it might also be something within them. There are people who are rather difficult to love. And if we think of love as spending time with people, it's one thing to have a positive attitude to people, but to be with this person to share their life, to share their desires, to share their wishes, that implies a certain kind of agreement, implies a certain kind of unity, a certain kind of peacefulness between two separate beings. So we're back to this idea of peace again. Can we understand love primarily as a certain kind of unity between people, or a certain kind of inner peace? Well, the trouble is most people are divided against themselves. Most people have some kind of inner conflict. We can agree with people up to a point, we can side with one side of them. It's very hard to side with the other side of them. And we might think it's in their interests that we support what we see as the better side of them against the worst side of them. But we're still not living and sharing their life completely unless we start sharing in their own inner conflict. How are we going to do this? Well, the big obstacle, I think, to this is a matter of both their fragmentation, but also a lack of trust. We might trust part of them. They've got good intentions, but they don't live out their life according to their good intentions. We're all like that. So how do we trust who they really are if we see them as unable to live out their lives according to their good intentions? How do we trust that they have good intentions for us that they can act on as well? This is, if you like, this is the problem of human sin, and it's the problem that makes it very difficult for humans to love other humans deeply, in a real way that endures over time and is not just a matter of good statements and good intentions. So the question is, what is it that can make someone worthy of being trusted? Now, suppose you meet someone who's had a deep confrontation with death, who's thought very hard about their mortality, and they've gone through these cyclical 4 stages: dispersion in the world, coming back to themselves, feeling that huge sense of responsibility, and then that and guilt and inner conflict, and then that sense of reprieve. Insofar as they're reprieved, they're no longer driven in quite the same way, and they're more aware of what it is to be, what it is to act out of their deepest cares, their deeper concerns. And in a way, they are a little bit more trustworthy. They're a bit more trustable. So what I'm suggesting is there's a kind of, it's difficult to grasp, but there's a deep inner connection between the thought of love and the thought of death. And the thought of love is a good intention, but it's somewhat powerless unless we can really trust the other person that we love. The thought of death is a kind of transformative thought. And if you come to terms with the fact that you're finite, if you stop grasping onto all the ways you're trying to evade it by some project that's going to outlive you and outlast you, give you a kind of immortality, if you renounce all that, you become more trustable, you become more lovable, and in a sense you make it easier for others to love you, as well as making it easier for you to love other people. So what I'm suggesting is it's not a matter of self-sacrifice that's the highest form of love. It's a matter of inner transformation through facing up to death that renders us both lovable and capable of loving. And so I think there is this deep inner connection between love and death, but it's not the one that you'd expect at first sight.
Philip, thank you so much for trying to explore this unending question.